And good afternoon, everyone. I am Lawson Wetley. I am a co-president of the League of Women Voters of Greenville County, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you all for our, drumroll please, first ever virtual Zoom event. So how fun is it to be guinea pigs all together trying to figure it out? But we're absolutely thrilled that each of you has taken the time and made the effort to be here. Our presentation, our event is going to go from noon to 1. I want to mention a couple of just housekeeping measures and then jump right into it. We are recording this event and we will later share the link so that, you know, all of us can share it and people who didn't have the opportunity to join can do it then. We have all of the participants muted with the idea that we just want the focus to be on the presenters, but we absolutely want you to participate. So for those of you where Zoom is a little new to you, there is a button towards the bottom that is a chat button, and we encourage you to use that freely. Introduce yourself, comment, you know, go for it in the chat. Among other things, we are going to be monitoring the chat for questions, because our plan for this event is that we'll have about 45 minutes of the presentation followed by a 15-minute Q&A period. And so we very much want to see your questions. Just drop them in the chat and we'll be keeping a lookout for that. And Greenville Director Michelle Byrne will be presenting those questions to Jerry and Kate during that Q&A period. So thanks again for being here. You know, one of the things for me in looking around the world where there are so many things that are troubling, I continue to be inspired by the organizations and the people that are making a positive difference. And organizations like Soteria and the South Carolina Second Chance Justice Collaborative, and people like Jerry Blassingame and Kate Weaver Patterson are so far up there in that category. So I'm so thankful for them and for their willingness to talk to us today. Issues like mass incarceration and its impact on racial inequity and on civic rights like voting rights have never been more important than they are today. So we so much appreciate your wisdom and your thoughts to help us understand these issues better. I'm going to take a moment to talk a little bit about our presenters, and then they can take the virtual mic. First, Kate Weaver Patterson leads the South Carolina Second Chance Justice Collaborative, which is a partnership between Soteria and nationwide reentry advocate Root and Rebound. The collaborative advocates for the rights of people who have been harmed and marginalized by mass incarceration, seeking to increase access to justice and opportunity for people with records, and to fight poverty and create second chances for people in Greenville and more broadly across South Carolina. Kate grew up in Greenville and attended Duke University for her undergraduate and law degrees. She also holds a master's degree in international affairs from the University of Hong Kong. After working in New York, Charlotte, and Miami, she returned home to the city and state she loves, looking to be a force for positive change. She lives in Greenville with her husband and their 2 children. And Kate, we're so thankful to have you here today.
Thank you.
Jerry Blassingame is the founder and CEO of Soteria Community Development Corporation. He endeavors to empower individuals and the community through education, affordable housing, financial literacy, community and economic development, and entrepreneurship. His passion is assisting individuals who have been incarcerated through reentry and helping them to become productive citizens. Jerry attended Columbia International University and studied architectural engineering at Greenville Technical College. Jerry received a 20-year prison sentence in 1995 and only served 3.5 years before being paroled in 1999. He is also a social entrepreneur who believes in social enterprise for the nonprofit sector. Jerry has continued to fight for change in legislation since he was granted a pardon in 2004. And after 14 years of advocacy, South Carolina passed its first legislation to expunge felony drug charges in December of 2018. Also in 2018, Jerry published his first book, Reclaimed, a memoir that details his story from tragedy to triumph. And I can attest, it's a great book, highly recommended. Jerry lives in Greenville with his wife, Stephanie, of 20 years, and 3 of their 6 kids. He is an active part of the community and an advocate for economic and social justice. Thanks so much for being with us here today, Jerry. And Kate, take it away.
Great, Lawson, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to the League for having us. Jerry and I are thrilled to be here to speak about something that is near and dear to our hearts. I have promised that I will keep this to 45 minutes, although I could talk to you about this for 6 hours. And like Lawson said, Jerry and I have been working on these issues, Jerry longer than I, but have been delighted to partner on these issues for over a year now. We are thrilled, although hate that it took something like the murder of George Floyd for the issues of racial inequity and mass incarceration to really come to the forefront of public dialogue. But it is so crucial that we as a society are recognizing what we are doing with our system of mass incarceration, what we need to do to fix that at a systemic level, and how that has impacted our brothers and sisters of color more than it has our white brothers and sisters. So along those lines, one of the things that is so crucially important, and I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say this, is ensuring that those who have been directly impacted have their voices heard at the table. And the first step to that is voting. So thrilled to be here to talk about some of the mechanics. I'm going to talk about some of the more, I won't say boring, I'll say the legal mechanics of how this works. And where Jerry is going to speak to the more important part of how people who have been directly impacted need to have their voices at the table, both from his personal experience and through the work that he's done for the last 20 years. So to kick us off, just wanted to give you all a very brief overview of what the Second Chance Justice Collaborative is, and then turn it over to Jerry to really talk more about the soteria aspect. But the Second Chance Justice Collaborative launched in 2019. We are almost exactly a year and a month old. And we launched as a partnership between Jerry's Soteria and Root and Rebound, which started in California and was looking to start a sister site elsewhere. Thankfully got connected with Jerry, and we were able to bring these 2 organizations together to form the Second Chance Justice Collaborative. We have a 3-pronged model of direct client services, advocacy, and education for and about people who have been system impacted. We're going to talk a little bit about how wide the impact of the criminal justice system is on American society. But just to give you an idea of that, 1 in 3 Americans have criminal record. And so we are talking about 33%, about 100 million people in the United States. So if you were able to be in a room, which none of us are with other people right now, but if you could envision yourself in a room the way things used to be pre-COVID, and you would look to your left and look to your right, statistically speaking, 1 out of the 3 of you there would have a criminal record. So that is why these issues around voting and ensuring that those who have been directly impacted are having their voices heard is so essential, because it is such a large part of our community. And as Jerry very often and always wisely says, those who are closest to the problem and should be offering the solutions are often furthest from the power and the avenues to offer those solutions. So with that, I think it's really important that we start with Jerry's voice, which should be closest to the power. So Jerry, I will turn it over to you to talk a little bit about soteria, and then more specifically of why voting is so essential for those who have been impacted. Oh, I think you're muted.
Can y'all hear me? All right, great. I'm sorry. So great, Kate. Thank you so much, and thanks for the introduction as well. I really appreciate being here. Soteria is an organization that's near and dear to my heart. As as I mentioned in the introduction, I started this organization while I was still serving a 20-year prison sentence, writing all the mission and vision and those things. So our mission is we advocate for economic and social justice for those and their families impacted by the criminal justice system. We work to create opportunities for previously incarcerated men to re-enter society through transitional housing, life skills, and job training. We had a bold vision statement 20 years ago to be a model for successful faith-based initiative by aligning government, churches, nonprofit organizations, and industry in the community to empower long-term positive change. And 20 years ago, that sounded like a foreigner speaking in South Carolina, a Black man with a criminal background talking about bringing all these different groups together to bring change. But I thank God that over the last 20 years, we've been able to do just that. My story is like a lot of other people who are in prison, especially Black and brown people. Broken home, trauma. Mother was murdered when I was 5 years old. Raised by a grandparent, not having a father in my home. That's my story. And a lot of people who are in prison, that's their story. And so I was one of those when I was in prison. I'm like, I've got to do something not only to change my life, but change the lives of others. I wanted my voice to be loud. And so after I wrote the program for Soteria, put it together. And, right now we have a 16-bed transitional housing facility where men can come and stay for 1 year, get their lives back together, find a job, get a mentor, get their finances together where they can be productive citizens. And not only that, but once they leave the program, we get them into their own house, apartment or house or whatever they choose to live in. Voting is very important, very important. One of the first things I did when I was released from prison was I went to get my driver's license, and that's when they had the motor voter. So I was able to register to vote at the DMV. Now, don't nobody tell anybody on me, this is old, but they let me register to vote while I was still on parole, and they didn't ask, I didn't tell. So I was able to vote, as soon as I got out, and I practiced. I voted, and I talked to other people about voting because my voice needed to be heard. Growing up in the Black community, I've always heard, our vote don't count. They're not going to hear nothing. They're not going to believe what we say anywhere. I'm not going to vote if they don't listen to what we say. But I realized while I was in prison, understanding the system in the criminal justice system, I understood that that was a way that I could be able to talk and to speak. And now that I'm a CEO of my organization I started 20 years ago, I understand how important it is to have a seat at the table. I'm thankful that I was invited to this table. I'm thankful that I'm invited, to be able to speak, not only share my story, but share my expertise. And I encourage everybody in our program to vote. All the guys who are eligible to vote, I let them know, look, you need to go out and you need to register. It's very important, especially in the times, that we are in right now. It's very important. It's paramount that we go out and we cast the ballot and we make sure that, we do it. So I'm thankful for Kate in the Second Chance Justice Collaborative. I'm thankful that I don't have to go out and do all the legal work anymore. I can go knock on Kate's door now and say, hey, Kate, I got a legal question for you. Because I used to be the resident attorney at Soteria. Now I'm not anymore. So thank you, Kate. And this partnership is great. It's just awesome just to have experts, who are working in our office who can help us navigate the system, not only when it comes to voting, but just other things when it comes to parole and probation and things like that I can really dig into on a daily basis and really help these guys, these men and women, who are getting out. So I just wanted just to come on, just to kind of share my story, but just to let everybody know how important it is and how hard it's been for us, how hard it was for me, how hard it is for people that live in the community that our office is in, Pomil. And so we want to make sure that we're here, when it comes to drives and, things like that, where people can understand that it's not hard to register to vote, that, we all have a voice. And just so thankful, to be in this place. So Kate, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and I'll come in and out, whenever you need me to to chime in, I'll be more than happy. But I'm thankful for our partnership, and I'm thankful for a forum where we can talk about an issue as important as voting, especially in the time that we're in right now. So.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And I will echo, Jerry and I don't get to see each other every day now that we're working from home, but I hope that it's obvious from this how much of a blessing it has been for us to be able to work together, and how excited we are about the vision that we have for criminal justice reform in South Carolina. The Second Chance Justice Collaborative is the only organization in South Carolina that focuses on legal advocacy specific to those who have been impacted. And that is an exciting place to be. It can also be a daunting place to be. And so Jerry and I climb that mountain every day, and are really glad to have this forum and people like everyone on this call who are interested in these issues. So let's talk just big picture about the numbers. I think so often in dialogues around criminal justice, people start talking about public safety, which is an important consideration, but sometimes these things can feel abstract, and I think it's really important to ground ourselves in the data, which is startling. So incarceration has increased by more than 500% in the last 40 years. 2.2 million people are in jail or prison in the United States right now. And like we said, 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. When we say criminal record, that can mean anything from a conviction to a charge for which you were arrested, even if that charge was dismissed. And most states, including South Carolina, that remains on your record, which we're going to talk a bit about what the collateral consequences are of having a criminal history. But oftentimes people think, well, our system is set up where you are innocent until proven guilty. And so if you're proven innocent, then no one will ever know. And that is not necessarily the case. In South Carolina, there's a very specific procedure that you have to go through, oftentimes pay for that procedure to get things like that expunged off your record so they don't continue to have an impact. We're not going to get in too specifically to why incarceration has increased by more than 500% in the last 40 years. Jerry and I are doing a presentation, if I can give it a plug, on August 25th in cooperation with United Ministries around the color of incarceration. And we're going to talk more specifically there about the history of incarceration, things like the war on drugs, how they targeted Black and Brown Americans. So if you are interested in more of that history and how we've gotten here, would love for you to join us for that. But for purposes of this conversation and understanding how many people are impacted and therefore how many people may be disenfranchised or think they're disenfranchised when it comes to voting, really wanted to point out these numbers to you, that we are looking at 1 in 3 Americans and a 500% increase in incarceration. This is a slide that I try and include in all of my presentations because I think it is telling when the United States is at the very top of the heap, and countries we consider to be much spottier in their human rights records, Russia, China, have incarcerated populations that are so much lower than our populations. And so when we think about mass incarceration, we need to think about it not only internally, and look particularly at the racial and socioeconomic factors that play in there, but also from a world view. Sometimes in having these conversations, people will say, well, if we incarcerated fewer people, crime would go up, and we have a lot of data from around the world that shows that that is simply not the case. And in fact, the data really shows that what we are doing in the United States is not working, and it is absolutely time for us to be thinking about what does work. This just shows, if any of you are visual learners like me, pictures always help. And so we can talk about what a 500% increase looks like, but I think it's important to see where we were from 1925 to 1980. And then really in 76 and 80, you see the war on drugs and the just massive increase of the numbers of people who are being housed in our prisons and jails. Just so folks know, because this will be an important part and point of the presentation later, because it pertains very particularly to voting. Jails are where we house people in each county. So each county in South Carolina has its own jail or detention center. The vast majority of the people who are being detained in those facilities are being detained pre-trial, which means they have not yet been convicted of a crime. Those people are eligible to vote if they are being detained pre-trial and they are not otherwise on supervision, which means they're not otherwise on parole or probation. People who are in prison at the South Carolina Department of Corrections have been convicted of their crime and are serving that time at SCDC. They are not entitled to vote under current South Carolina law. When we talk about mass incarceration, it is important for us to look at the numbers as a whole, but it is particularly important for us to be aware of the racial inequities that we see across the system. This is not specific to South Carolina or the South. This is looking at the United States as a whole. So what I really want you to take away from this is 1 in 9 men in the United States will experience some form of imprisonment over the course of their life. 1 in 3 Black men. And there are quite a few studies that have come out since 2001 looking at Black baby boys and Black boys born after 2001. And so I want everyone to think about that these children who have been born since I graduated from high school have a 1 in 3 chance of ending up in prison. And what that does to families, what that does to communities, what that does to their possibilities because of the collateral consequences that we are going to discuss. The ravages of the system are things that Jerry and I see every day and are real. I'm a former prosecutor and am proud of the work that I did when I was there. I was a child abuse prosecutor primarily, but and there are some remarkable people who are working in the system for change. There are some remarkable people working in the system because there are some people who need to be in the system, a change system, Jerry and I think, but who may need to be separated from society for safety issues. These numbers in front of you do not represent that. And when we look at particularly the racial disparities, if the sheer numbers of mass incarceration don't bring us to our knees, this should, and this has got to change. So it's interesting to look at the full picture, but as all of us are particularly focused, and the Second Chance Justice Collaborative and Soteria are focused on South Carolina, I think it's appropriate for us to look at our numbers. We have about 386 people incarcerated for every 100,000 residents. Our current prison population is just over 16,000. I will say, as a piece of good news, which I take advantage of being able to deliver that whenever I can, especially in 2020, that is down fairly significantly from even March. In March, we were hovering just under 19,000. That is not, unfortunately, because of any sustained effort by either the governor or SEDC to cull the population down. Other states, because of COVID-19, have really looked at prison populations and people who are over the age of 65, who may have completed the vast majority of their sentence, and really thinking through how we can decarcerate some of our facilities to allow for things like social distancing. As many of you may know, 9 of the 10 hotspots in the United States for coronavirus are in carceral settings. There are myriad factors for those, for why that's the case. But when you have 4 people living in a 6x8 cell, you can imagine the consequences of the virus getting inside and what that does to a population. So this has unfortunately not been a result of a systematic approach to reducing the population, although we have been involved in some litigation and supporting particularly the ACLU around their SEDC litigation, and we have filed our own litigation against Spartanburg County Jail to look at getting these numbers down. Part of why this number is lower is SEDC, because of the virus, is not accepting new individuals. So those individuals who may have been convicted are being held at local facilities. Trials are also not going forward. But there is some bright light in that the number is down. And my understanding is that the parole board is being a little more open to the possibility of parole than perhaps it has been in the past. So we are hoping that this dip in numbers is not just coincidence, but is something that we can start to see more regularly. Our current parole and probation population is just under 40,000 people. Parole and probation are the 2 supervisions. So once someone is out of prison, they will come out on parole. If someone is convicted of something but doesn't go to prison for it, they are on probation. All of those are overseen by the Department of Parole, Probation, and Pardons, by officers around the state. People have various conditions on them. The most important thing to know for purposes of our topic of voting today is that someone who is currently on parole or probation cannot vote. We spend $632 million a year on corrections. I think that is particularly poignant now as we are thinking about what our education spending can be to keep our children safe. We are spending an enormous amount on corrections in South Carolina every year. Our ratio of white to Black prisoners in South Carolina is 4.3 to 1. And we have 47,238 people who are currently disenfranchised. 38,916 of those individuals are Black. So when we talk about voting in a criminal justice, through a criminal justice lens, there is no question in my mind, nor I think can there be a question in anyone's mind when you look at the numbers, that this is a racial equity issue as well as a civil rights issue and a criminal justice reform issue. So I want to talk just for a moment about collateral consequences. Collateral consequences are what we in the criminal justice reform world often refer to as perpetual punishment, but I think that is actually the perfect definition of them. Oftentimes people think that you go into the criminal justice system, you get convicted, you complete your sentence, and you're done. But what Jerry and I can tell you from his personal experience and from both of our professional experiences is that is simply not the case. And this is something that we do not do a good job of educating our public defenders, our solicitors, and our community at large about are the lifelong collateral consequences that people experience as a result of a criminal record. As I mentioned, your criminal record can include things that you have not been convicted of. I had a client a few weeks ago who had been charged with a criminal sexual conduct with a minor that had been very quickly dismissed, but was still showing up on her record. And you can imagine what that did when she went into job interviews. So it can include things that are of which you have not been convicted. Things do not fall off after a certain period of time. Some states have passed legislation that Jerry and I are working on advocating for here in South Carolina in terms of expanding what our expungement and record cleaning options are. In some states, convictions, particularly nonviolent ones, will fall off someone's record after a certain period of time, often between 5 and 7 years. We do not have that here. So for instance, we had a client who had a drug conviction from 20 years ago for marijuana that was still showing up on her record, had nothing since then, and it was keeping her from housing. And in South Carolina, we also have a drug felony food stamp ban. So anyone with a drug felony over any period of time, so let's say they were convicted when they're 17 and they're now 35 with children they're trying to feed, are not eligible for food stamps. And that is a huge problem that we see, and one of these collateral consequences. So you have your criminal record of arrests, sometimes non-convictions and convictions. Once you have completed your sentence of possibly imprisonment and then parole or probation or fines, people think you're done, but that record follows you. Every landlord, every employer is going to do a background check. Oftentimes those background checks are through third-party background companies who are not ruled by any particular law. It can be kind of the wild, wild west. Mistakes can get made, but even if they're not mistakes, the fact that these convictions and arrests follow people around make it incredibly difficult for them to find appropriate housing, for them to find employment. We also see folks who struggle through probation and parole conditions. Sometimes the conditions are warranted. Sometimes they can be very onerous. Sometimes you get the right parole agent who understands. Other times you don't, and things like transportation or lack of access to a phone or computer, especially now, can be extremely problematic and can result in a violation for individuals. Fines and fees are a huge thing that we see people struggle with. Oftentimes, I didn't put the stats in on this that because they're much harder to come by as we look at what the stats are for people of so low socioeconomic means who are system involved. But we know because of the demand on our public defenders and the people we see coming through our doors, that oftentimes the people who have been system involved and continue to be system involved are people living in poverty. And the fines and fees that can be associated with a criminal conviction would blow the minds of those on this call. And so you can imagine what they do to people who are already struggling to find employment because of a record and struggling to pay. So let me give you one example of how that can be incredibly problematic. If someone has not paid their insurance on their car, their license can be suspended. You have to pay fines and fees to get your license reinstated and also be able to pay your car insurance. If you can't do that and you get caught driving without a license 3 times, once your license has been suspended, you can be charged with what is called a habitual traffic offense, which is a 5-year felony. So payment of fines and fees not only can impede getting off of supervision on the back end of things, it can also lead to another conviction. And those fines and fees can multiply. They follow people around. That becomes an issue with on people's credit. Oftentimes, if people are unable to pay these fines and fees, or restitution can be converted to a civil judgment that follows folks around, making it difficult for them to start any sort of business, get any sort of loan, mortgage, things like that. And, you know, speaking of driver's licenses, just IDs and the ability of people to get IDs when they get out of prison is an incredibly difficult process. People get out with their prison ID. The DMV won't accept a prison ID as a valid state ID. One might say, SCDC should know who these people are, and thus that government ID should qualify. It doesn't. No, that doesn't make any sense. Yes, we are working on it, but even simple things like IDs become incredibly problematic. Family stability issues. People who have lost custody of their children while they're incarcerated. Child support continues to accrue while someone is incarcerated, so people can come out with significant debt. So my point in all of this is to say that being system involved follows you, and it impacts almost every aspect of people's lives. One of the things that we can do to help people is walk with them through a pardon process or expungements. Pardons say that your record has been pardoned, although your record will still show up. Expungements actually clear your record. So that's the gold standard of where we'd like to get people. Our expungement statute, as Lawson mentioned initially, Jerry was a huge advocate for that, is better as of 2018, but we would certainly like for it to be stronger. And so that's something that we continue to look at. But let's talk very specifically about voting. I hope from this you have taken and can understand why we feel so strongly about it, because so much of what I've talked about with collateral consequences and with mass incarceration is policy. And so what we try and convey to clients and to the community is, if you want this to be changed, and we want this to be changed, and we are working on this, but we need voters in the polls to either vote people who are not looking for change out or support those who do. So in South Carolina, one of the reasons that we wanted to really focus on this with y'all, and this is our initial presentation to the community at large in South Carolina. So often people who have a criminal record think that a collateral consequence of that is that their voting rights are taken away forever. And thankfully, that is just not true. But people do have to re-register. So if they think that they are disenfranchised, they will remain disenfranchised. And so we are really trying to get out the word and educate on what people's voting rights are, and really appreciate this partnership with the league to be able to use y'all's platform and voice to help us get that message out. So if you have been convicted of a felony in South Carolina, which is a crime that typically carries over a year in prison, even if you didn't go to prison, if the sentence is that's possible is over a year in prison, you were convicted of a felony. That can be anything like the habitual traffic offense that I mentioned, up to murder. Or any of those and anything in between, once you have completed your supervision, you are eligible to vote. And at every presentation you see me do around any sort of issue, you will probably hear me say this, but we really want to get that out there, because it's particularly people with felonies who think that they do not have the right to vote, and they do once they come off of supervision. Like everything else that I've talked about so far, that's unfortunately not as clear-cut as it sounds. Because of those fines and fees that are associated, there is no agreement between probation and parole and voter registration as to what successful completion means. That can vary from probation officer to probation officer. Our position is that outstanding fines and fees, once you have completed everything else, absolutely should not impinge on someone's right to vote. But to the extent that people are getting that message from PPP, that is obviously problematic. You may have seen in Florida, this has just been litigated, went up to the Supreme Court, has come back down to the 11th. Florida had passed a referendum that fines and fees were not going to keep people from voting, and the 11th Circuit has reversed that. So this is an issue in a lot of states. It amounts to a poll tax as we go back and talk about our racial and equity issues. And so we feel really strongly that fines and fees should not have to be completely paid if everything else has been taken care of. But that's an issue we see a lot. For folks with misdemeanors, people with misdemeanors are automatically restored as soon as they are released from prison, or most likely jail, because misdemeanors typically carry 30 days or less. If someone committed election fraud, they have to complete their sentence in that case. But for the most part, and I haven't run across an election fraud yet, we are looking at as soon as someone's out of jail, they are eligible to vote. Sorry, I'm checking my time here because, like I said, I can talk about this for 4 hours. So I want to be sure that I'm leaving some time for questions. And looks like I'm okay. So, like I mentioned, the felony and the misdemeanor are for restrictions are for people who have been convicted. So if they have been convicted of a misdemeanor, convicted of a felony, they are eligible to vote either after release for a misdemeanor or after completion of their sentence for a felony. A lot of times people think if they are in jail that they are not eligible to vote. And I have not seen a lot of effort by jail administrations or voter registration or anyone else to dispel people of that myth. This is something we're working really hard on, and if anyone is interested in ways to get involved, which we are going to talk about in a second, this is an area that we are really looking at hard before the November election, is how we get people inside of our jails who are eligible to vote registered and get them an absentee ballot. They are entitled to that absentee ballot under statute, but being entitled to it and actually getting it in their hands, as everyone knows, can be two very different things. Whether or not we are looking at Greenville, Columbia, and Charleston, and the detention centers there is a voting coalition that is forming around the state to look at this issue, and others would welcome anyone's participation. But we are really looking to push the jails to ensure that our citizens who have not been convicted, who are sitting in jail, have the right to vote during this very important election. So the second part, and where I think the league can be so instrumental, first is getting people to understand what their rights are, and second is getting them re-registered, because you have to submit you are automatically put back on the rolls as eligible, but you must submit a new registration once you become eligible after being convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor. And so being sure that people understand how to register, when they need to register, and then how they will be able to vote is such an important second part of our educational outreach. So how can you help? I know it can be really frustrating to go to a presentation and think, I feel really strongly about this, I want to get involved. I hope you feel that way, but then not know how to do that. So I wanted to give you a few options and suggestions for how you can get involved in your own community, and how, if you are interested, you could get involved with our larger voting coalition. So Lawson and Deb have been involved in this initial effort. We are spearheading this at the Second Chance Justice Collaborative, getting a voting coalition together with advocates from around the state, including people and groups like the ACLU, the NAACP, Every Black Girl Inc., various South Carolina Appleseed, various advocates to really come together and say, we need to be sure we know what other groups are doing, because too much work to do to reinvent any sort of wheel. And how can we work together and support those initiatives? So we are thrilled that the League of Greenville has indicated interest, and Lawson has participated from the beginning, and we're thrilled to have Deb coming on board. Would absolutely welcome other chapters or other individuals to be involved. We're going to have a core group of planners, and then we need people in the larger coalition to really help us get our plan off of paper and out into the community. So join the voting coalition, and as you can see my email here at the bottom, please feel free to reach out to me and we will get you involved. Educate and advocate. We have resources. The League has fantastic resources to get people registered. We at the Second Chance Justice Collaborative have a lot of resources around systems impacted voting and what that looks like. So if you are interested in going out and doing a presentation, if you are interested in talking to your church about getting people registered, we are happy to send you out into the world with materials, with support, and with whatever we can arm you with to get as many people to the polls as possible. So get folks registered into the polls. I mean, this is probably the most preaching to the choir that I can do to the League of Women Voters about getting people registered into the polls. But we all know that's really where the rubber hits the road and what we need to make happen in November. I mentioned our jail work. That could lead to possible litigation. So if you have an interest in helping us explore what is happening in our jails, gather the information that we're trying to gather right now. If you're a lawyer and would be interested in looking at potential cases with us, we would love to have you, but certainly don't need to be a lawyer to participate in that. And as I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to me. Lawson also knows how to get in touch with me. I know how to get in touch with Jerry. So please know that there are avenues of communication for you to get to us, and we could use as much help on this as we can get. So we hope that this has been informative, and that we can all join in this together to really move the needle forward.
Great, thank you so much, Jerry and Kate. That was absolutely wonderful. And Michelle, are you ready to take it away for Q&A?
I am. Thanks again. Jerry, could you talk a little bit more about expungement, like the specifics, cost, what it covers, what it doesn't cover? Because you were talking about a little bit about to strengthen it. So where would you like it to go?
Yeah, most definitely. And I'll also let Kate jump in too, because she's been working on this, a lot in the last year since you've joined the team. So yeah, so it's about $350 per charge. And a lot of times people have more than one charge. You may have 3 or 4 charges, and you're talking about 350 times 4 or 5 sometimes. And that's a big thing. One thing they did in the legislation is they set up a fund at each solicitor's office where they could possibly pay 50% of that. And so that helps if there's money in the account. Most of the time there's not money in the account, so that doesn't help. We have set up a small fund here in Greenville that we can pay half as well. So that is helping too. That is ran through the United Way office, and we kind of manage that out of Satira's office. So it is a daunting task because you got to get a criminal background pulled, a sledge pulled, and most people don't know how. You can go to the detention center, but there again, we have a system here in the office where we can charge $8 to get your criminal background charge, get that record pulled. And so people don't know how to read it. That's a whole nother thing, so sometimes you need a lawyer, especially with the new law. And so that's where Kate comes in. Her and her staff can help people navigate that. And Kate, can you talk more about that? What's misunderstanding about some of the charges? What can be off, and what can come off?
Absolutely. So yeah, like Jerry said, one of the barriers to entry that we see is the cost, which is, for anybody, $900 is significant. But oftentimes people who haven't been able to find a job because of their record don't have the $900 to pay. But the second barrier to entry is that it is fairly limited in what we can expunge. So I have clients a lot of times ask us, you know, I have an armed robbery on my record. Can I get that expunged? And the answer is unfortunately no. Typically what can be expunged in South Carolina are 30-day misdemeanor offenses. So you are talking about your driving under, well, no, actually driving under suspension is not eligible. No driving. The only driving offense that is eligible, this is one of my favorite things ever, is failure to stop for a blue light. So if you are racing away from police in a high-speed chase, putting people's lives at danger, then that is eligible. But if you have a driving under suspension because you didn't pay your car tax, that is not eligible for expungement. But typically it is 30-day misdemeanors, possession charges. So first possession charges of narcotics. There is, you can get a possession with intent to distribute expunged, but only after 20 years. So there is a limited number of convictions that can be expunged, and there are also time frames that you have to pass without another conviction to get that expungement. Those range, there are a few that are 1 year, oftentimes they're 3 years, sometimes they're 5 years. So we have a list, a one-pager, if anyone is interested, that lays out the specific statute and what is available for expungement. The rules are very complicated. They are littered throughout the code. So there's not even one specific place you can tell people to go look. So we always encourage people to give us a call. Our services at the collaborative are free. So anyone with a record can call and we will get the record that Jerry was describing. We can get it a lot cheaper because we're a nonprofit, and go through that with someone and really walk them through if this, then that. It can almost be one of those mazes to walk down. But typically you are looking at 30-day misdemeanors, certain drug crimes, failure to stop for a blue light, and then any sort of felony, particularly violent felony, is not eligible. What people are eligible though, and can get with any record is a pardon. And our pardon rate in South Carolina is actually fairly high. And Jerry himself walked through the pardon process. One thing that we would like to see happen, even if your offense gets pardoned, which is a pretty intensive application and an interview in front of the board, it's still not expunged. So it'll show, you know, murder, pardoned, but that's still going to show up. But we do always like to tell people that having a pardon on their record is positive, and a pardon excuses the entire record, whereas expungement, as Jerry was saying, you have to go charge by charge.
All right, thank you. So it's very complex. There's no easy answer to that, is there? Let's see, for resources, I wanted to tell everybody in the audience that under the chat, if you open up the chat, there is the link. Lawson put up the link for your color of incarceration in a registration link. And Kate, what was the date of that again?
August 25th.
Okay, so everybody knows that that link is there. And I also wanted to, since we've now heard from Jerry, his book again is called Reclaimed, A Story of Second Chances. So I want everybody to know that. I think one thing that we do with the League is to really inspire folks to vote. And do either of you have advice to, if a person really feels that their vote doesn't count, and I'm sure you come across with folks like, oh, I'm not going to bother. Any inspirational stories or motivations that you can give these folks?
Yeah, well, I just, you know, I like to use the Obama campaign, you know, what he did. He went into communities, had young folks to really rally communities. And I think that helped people to understand it, but also just the local, because people mostly look at president and, you know, Congress, but they forget about local, you know, the county council, city council, which are small municipalities, which, you know, some people win by 10 and 15 votes, you know, and so I always try to use those examples of a county council or city council, because people complain about city and county as well. So if we start local with our community and use those stories, that kind of helps. So that's what I tell the guys in my program, where they live. I try to teach them who our county council rep is, those in the city, our city council rep. And if you're not satisfied with them, find somebody who you're satisfied with and let's vote for them.
And we talk a lot too about sheriffs and solicitors, since those are elected positions in South Carolina. I'm a firm believer that if you really want to have a sense of the community and the community's voting leanings, then you should be looking at their sheriff and solicitor, because people a lot of times will go out for those very strongly. People think justice and the justice system one way or the other. And so really encourage people who have been system impacted to say, hey, the office that convicted you, that person has to go up for re-election every 4 years. And that is an incredibly important election. The sheriff is an incredibly important election in how that particular office's culture and expectations are set.
Great advice, both of you. Thank you. We have about a couple minutes left. Are there any misconceptions out there? What are you that are common misconceptions that you guys fight for folks coming out of the justice system? I mean, you talked a little bit about them, but.
Well, one thing is that, you know, a lot of people who get out of prison think they can't vote at all, even when they're out. Once you complete your sentence and you're not on probation or parole, you can vote. The day you walk out of the door, you can vote. And so some people just don't know that. And there's rumors going around, you know, that you can't vote if you have a criminal background, but you can. And so I just want everybody to know that, you know, you can vote, you know, as long as you're off probation and parole, you don't have no paperwork, you're good.
And I would say the misconception that we also fight. So we've got people who are directly impacted who have misconceptions about what their rights are, and also the general community who has significant misconceptions about what it means to have a record. Employers, we talk to employers about this all the time. This is another great way for folks on this call to get involved. If you are an employer, please consider second chance hiring. Over and over, we hear from employers that their best employees are those who have been given a second chance for a variety of reasons. And so we really need to be rethinking of how we talk about people who have been system impacted, how everyone who is sitting in jail doesn't need to be called an inmate, how everyone with a criminal record shouldn't be called an ex-con, how we really need to work on humanizing those who have been impacted by the justice system, even those who have made horrible mistakes. We seem to manage to do that as parents pretty well, I think, across the spectrum, but not as a society as a whole. We lose track of the humanity of the people we incarcerate, and that's really problematic.
Thank you both. For resources, I also wanted to say there's quite a few resources on Soteria website and also some information. So that was helpful. Anything else that folks could look at that you think for resources?
There is a great website that Lawson, I know, and I have talked about, and maybe she could distribute, that allows people to go on and basically say, I'm from this state. Do you, and it's, you know, walks you through almost a checkbox. Do you have a felony conviction? Yes or no. Are you still on parole or probation? Yes or no. As I see Deb mentioned in the chat, you know, there is so much lack of clarity around fines and fees and whether people have paid those, whether their right to vote is restored. That is problematic. We are always happy to consult with someone on that and reach out specifically to voter registration and PPP for them. But there are some great resources out there that I'm happy to share with Lawson if she can get those distributed, that help walk people through that process. And we also have a lot of I'm going to put this in the chat, at rootandrebound.org. There are a lot of community forums that we've done around this issue and others that folks can access for free. And so they are welcome to peruse any resources that we have there.
Well, thank you very much. As a member and director for the Greenville League of Women Voters, we appreciate everyone spending their lunch hour with us. And again, very thankful for your time, Kate and Jerry. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We appreciate it.